Morning. Good morning, guys. Good morning. How you doing? How was your exam? Seriously? Well, I don't know yet because I've not graded the exam yet. Yeah, I mean, normally within like the same day I push the grades, that's it. But I mean, I still have to put all the, answers to the computer, and then some like 50% the way through. So, but I'll try to finish that today, tomorrow, and then Friday we'll have a review session of my portion of the exam. Okay. I know you have many questions, but this is your password. So start working on this until I answer your questions. Yes, Kendra. Okay. I mean, like right now. Oh, you want me to cancel that like a class for day, right? Yes, sir. So again, you can. Is there a problem? Okay, so if you have a problem, keep trying, and then we'll see. Hopefully, it will be resolved. If not, we'll take the paper copy. Yeah, I mean, yes, no. I'm sorry. I hope so. it's true false questions, 10 true false questions, and very general. Okay, you have a question? I'm sorry. Say it again. Not yet. Not yet. Yeah. So I have to look at your comments as well. Okay, and then me and Dr. Pearson will, look at the results. But first, I have to see the results, and I'm being careful entering the answers. Right? Don't rush me. So don't make mistakes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we have a rat on Friday. Yes. Say it again. Oh, yes, the review. Yes. So the review will be after class, guys. Okay. Because remember, we decided we have a review after each class. Like today, when we finish after 12, you can bring your lunch and we'll review today's session. So Friday, we'll do the same, but we'll also look at the exam results, okay? And, address my questions. Other questions? Okay, so today we'll talk about seizure and anti-seizure medications, okay? Very horrible drugs, actually. There's been a lot of side effects with these anti-seizure medications, as you will see. Really? Like somebody. Oh, so like someone like giving the peanut butter. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's rude. I know. Makes me wonder if someone's actually done that for them to come up with an innovation. Yeah, we'll see. We'll talk about the side effects. Melody. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
While we're all downloading the exam, can you do like mini little reviews in the morning?
In the morning, mini review now, like for the questions I put. Oh, nice try. No. Okay, let me check. So how many of you is not ready to take the exam? If you have any issues, raise your hand up high so I can see. 1, 2, 3. Can you please raise your hand? 3 people. Okay. Okay, maybe we should give you guys the paper copy in this case. Is it still okay? So for you guys who are not able to take the exam, can I have you sit on the back? So just work. Excellent. So how about yours? Still okay. So just leave it.
Cat Friday.
So again,
Cat Friday.
you have a cat Friday
Yeah.
for lab? Seriously? What time? 2 o'clock?
Can we do the review tomorrow?
Well, I cannot tomorrow. Actually, I have meetings and so that's good to know. At 2 o'clock, so you probably want to be studying before last minute. Do you want to do the review, guys? Shh. I was just informed. I'm sorry that you have a cat on Friday, right? Lab. Okay, so do you want to do the review on Monday then? Okay, so we'll do the review on Monday. Okay, so Monday after class we'll do the review about the exam. Okay, the cat, but I'm still gonna try to push the grades before Friday. Okay, be able to send you all the results before Friday, hopefully. Did it work? No? Okay, so let's take the paper copy. Okay, so we're ready to start the rat. So if you have any issues with your computer, let me know. I assume everybody's on the start screen. Okay. So go ahead and start. I'll set the time. It should be a quick rat. I'm gonna set the timer for 8 minutes. Go ahead and start. Good luck. Okay, you could start working on your T rat now. I'm gonna set the timer in a minute. Guys, please make sure you put your name in there, okay? Make sure you sign your name. Has everybody turned in their exam? Guys, everybody has finished? Okay, so let's look at the questions together. Okay, so for the first one, in the simple partial epilepsy, patient does not lose consciousness. We all know that they don't. Okay, so the answer is true. Convulsion disorder can be caused by reduction in the excitation of neurons. False, we all know it's false. This is one of the mechanisms actually how convulsion occurs, by increase of the excitation. What's the other mechanism? Decrease in the inhibition, right? I mean, makes sense. Number 3, the influx of sodium ions into the neuronal cell causes depolarization. We all know it's true. Why is that? Huh? So how is what's the difference in the action potential between inside and outside the neuron? Outside it's positive, inside it's negative. So depending on your reference, it's minus what? 90, 70, 90, okay? Minus 90 at inside the cell. So the first step in the propagation of the signal is by influx of sodium inside, which makes the difference less. It becomes depolarized, okay? And then that's how the process starts, okay? And then GABA is an inhibitory amino acid that causes hyperpolarization. Is it true? We all know it's true. So what does GABA do? Inhibition, how? Chloride channels. Chloride gets in or out? Gets in. So what happens to the difference at the membrane? Increases, okay? Instead of minus 90, it's now, let's say, minus 150, for example, or 100, minus 120. So what happens when you have the difference higher? Would be more difficult to depolarize, okay? So it'll be more difficult to bring the difference to zero and, actually it's going to be positive outside. So it will be more difficult to do that. So you basically are inhibiting the signal propagation, okay? Right. And this is the fun part, number 5. So apparently I miskeyed the FFAT cards, okay? So there's nothing, so number 5, increasing the difference in the action potential across the membrane would decrease the likelihood of excitation of the neuron. We all agree it's true, right? In the FFAT cards, I miskeyed the question, I put it false, so I will fix the T-rat part, but the I-rat, there's nothing wrong with it, okay? So the I-rat, on the computer should be true. Say it again. It was written very funny to you, okay. So defend, what's your issue with it?
My issue with it was that it's an action potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be right if it was resting potential. So when it's an action potential, that's usually when it is depolarized.
Okay.
So we didn't know what point you were killing with. Because the way the rest was working, it made it seem like it was resting, but you've had action there. So we didn't know if it was true. Because if you increase action potential, wouldn't it depolarize? That's how she was reading it. We were confused.
Okay. John.
Actually, that's what I was going to say, that I thought it was a typo and I should have just automatically picked false. I don't know what I'm marking. So.
Okay.
But,
Melody.
yeah,
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So, all right. So forget the question. It will be bonus, but let's understand the concept. Okay. So if this is the membrane, so let's say this is your neuronal cell. Okay. I'm going to use these lines. So you have positive outside. Okay. Negative inside. Positive. Negative. Okay. And the difference between these two is 90. Was it millivolt, something like that? Anyway, so by increasing the difference between the charge, the potential, I guess, or the charges, by instead of 90, if it becomes now 120, then would it become easier to depolarize the cell or more difficult? More difficult. So the question was, what I intended is by increasing the difference, it would decrease the likelihood of excitation, which is true because it's more difficult now to excite the neuron. Yes. Yes. So. Yes, that's a good point. So, guys, depolarization and hyperpolarization. Do you know the difference? What's the difference between these two terms? So hyperpolarization, the difference between the charges inside and outside will be higher. Makes sense, right? Hyperpolarization. Depolarization, you're bringing this down to 0, and then you actually flip. Later on, you flip the charges will be inside positive, outside negative. Okay, so depolarization you are reducing that. So instead of this line here, if I say hyperpolarization, okay, would decrease the excitation. Okay, that's the intention, which is true. And that's what neurotransmitter causes hyperpolarization? GABA. Okay, how? By getting chloride inside. Okay, which makes sense because now when we have chloride ions inside, minus, because chloride are minus, when you get more chloride inside, then the difference become bigger, so it has the inhibitory effect. Melody. Okay, so the difference between hyperpolarization and depolarization. In the hyperpolarization, you're actually increasing the difference in charge. So either by adding more positive outside or more negative inside. Depolarization, you're actually canceling the difference. So if you add more positive charge inside, it becomes depolarized, which is the case of the what? Sodium. When sodium goes in, it cancels the negative charge inside, and that's depolarization. Okay, and this is actually the first step in the signal propagation or transduction. The first step is depolarization. Okay. We will talk about the signal transduction. So if you have a question about that, we'll explain this more. So any issues so far about this? No? Okay. Number 6. Anti-epileptic drugs act either by enhancing brain GABA activity or inhibiting excitatory amino acids. Well, no, it's true. So you basically, you look at the two mechanisms of how the neuron gets excited or inhibited, and then you either inhibit the excitation or increase the inhibition. Seizure control requires that the drug's plasma concentration remain relatively consistent at therapeutic levels throughout all 24 hours of the day. Well, that's true. In fact, this is one of the problems with dealing with seizure. We want to make sure the drug is within therapeutic window. And then these drugs are hard to keep within therapeutic windows. For example, the phenytoin has nonlinear pharmacokinetic, which we will talk about. So the drug easily gets above the therapeutic window and causes toxicity. What's the side effect of the phenytoin? Gingivitis? You know what? Huh? Osteomalacia, okay. So many side effects, okay, but the most common one is gingivitis, okay. These gums, they get inflamed, okay. So oral hygiene would be an issue and would be important to keep your, the patient would have to keep their teeth cleaner. Okay, what did we get? Number eight, the large range in the elimination half-life of phenytoin. So normally half-life has a fixed number of hours, right? We say half-life 8 hours, 7 hours, but then with the phenytoin, it's between 15 to 30 hours, right? So that's a large range. This range indicates that the drug achieves consistent therapeutic plasma concentration. Does that make sense? No, I mean, we all know it's false, but does it make sense? Does the sentence make sense? So when you have this range of elimination half-life, which means that this person is going to have a different half-life, this person is going to have a different half-life, someone would have 15, other have 30, and so I'm not able, if I give the same dose, then it's hard to make sure that the drug stays within the therapeutic window, okay? So in this case, it's false, because this is one of the issues with phenytoin, that it does not give you consistent therapeutic concentration. Explain more, okay. So normally you have a value, fixed value for the elimination half-life. Okay. So when you have a fixed value for the elimination half-life, as we have seen in the past in the basics we studied, then you can calculate how much dose you should give to keep the drug in the therapeutic window, right? Now, with the phenytoin, elimination half-life varies from one person to another. So someone might have like elimination half-life of 15, somebody else may have 30. So if I give both people the same dose, then the steady state concentration will be different for these two people, which is the reason why phenytoin is hard to control. And that's why you want to make sure you adjust the dose and measure the blood concentration and keep adjusting the dose to make sure that it's in the right therapeutic window. Okay, so the fact that we have a large range does not indicate a consistent therapeutic window concentration. It actually indicates that it's hard to keep the drug within the therapeutic window. Okay, make sense, guys? Okay, 9 and 10. Phosphenytoin is a prodrug that was developed to overcome solubility problems with phenytoin. Well, no, it's true. I'm not going to explain why, because we will talk about it in the exercise, okay? So basically, it's a function group that's polar. We add to the drug, enhance its solubility, okay? And then when the drug gets inside, this function group leaves, and then we go back to the phenytoin, okay? The last one, autoinduction, occurs when an anti-epileptic drug binds to autoreceptors and uses, I have no idea how I came up with this. I just thought I would, test your knowledge, see if you have read anything about autoinduction. Did you read autoinduction? Seriously. It's in the objectives. It's in the reading objectives. Yes.
Or we going to at a later date read the rest?
Are we what? I'm sorry?
Oh, you sent an email
Uh-huh.
that said like stop reading at a certain point,
Yeah.
and we're gonna read the rest of it.
Oh, okay. So that's another issue. Okay. So guys, the first 14 pages covers the basics. Okay. So then the reminder, we will pick certain things that we'll go through today. And the reminders are just memorizations, which I hate. So it's just going to be for your own education. Remember, you're responsible for your own education, right? Right? So the rest of the pages actually, if you read its repetition, you're gonna see drug interactions, you're gonna see autoinduction, which is the same concepts, right? So the same concepts, you can apply them anywhere. You're also gonna see some side effects, which you will visit next session by Dr. Jones and Dr. Coyne, and Dr. Glevy. So you will learn about all these side effects, but I hate to delete this information, erase it, because you wanna learn, right? The videos will highlight the videos I sent, YouTube's highlight the major side effects. Some of them even help you memorize these side effects. So you could actually, learn that for your own education. For me, if I ask you to memorize side effects, then after a class, you're never gonna, forget it. So I try to focus on the basics. Make sense? So all the basics you need will be covered in the first 14 pages, plus few things that we'll talk about today. And that will be the only things you need to, the things you will be, tested on. But then the remainders, really, you should read to go through for your own education. Make sense? Okay, yes. So the rest I will select few concepts of the rest that we'll talk about today in the practice exercise, but it's not, I cannot test you on things. You have to memorize. I try to focus on the concepts, okay? Okay. So now I know nobody's going to read these pages after I said that. It's okay, but I know even if you read it, you'll forget. So just focus on the concepts, go through them. You still need to know their mechanism of actions, because that's among the 14 pages. Remember, there is a graph that compares all the mechanism of actions for these drugs. It's within the first 14 pages, right? So we're gonna be responsible for their mechanism of actions. Questions? So, okay, back to this. So what's autoinduction? Okay, yes, ma'am, go ahead. About, sorry again?
About
Number 8. Okay, back to number 8, yes, ma'am.
yeah, you were talking about the range in the animation of like causing phenytoin not to be
Consistent.
consistent.
Yeah.
But in the question, we're not talking about comparing with others. The question was that it indicated that the drug achieves consent therapeutic factor for the patient. We're not talking maybe among the users or anything, but we're talking about it's kind of generalized, it's not specific. It's like it actually indicates consistent therapeutic factor concentration in the person that you got because of different manufacturers. It's, as in, I think the question is not specific, it's kind of generalized, and to me.
Okay. So her question was that the phenytoin, I mean, this question about phenytoin is not specific, it's more general. So maybe if it was compared to other drugs, then you would say, you know, okay. All right, well, I disagree. I'm sorry. No. So I see your point, right? I'll look at the question, and if I see this is consistent issues, you know, then I'll take care of it, okay? Okay. Right, yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay, I'll look. Okay. Okay. Well, do you understand it now? Does it make sense now? Okay. Well, that's what's important. Okay. I will look at the questions, and if I see that, you know, I normally look at the statistics for each question. If I see a question that's problematic, then, you know, I'll give it a bonus. But I'm not gonna. I cannot tell now. Okay. Okay, what about number 10? Back to the autoinduction. So what is autoinduction, guys? Does it have to do anything with the autoreceptor? No. Okay, so it's false, right? So what is autoinduction?
It's like when you ask that test question with the circle things, and you only have one circle around the drug.
Say it again.
That chart with the on a test where you have the chart and it says induction, substrate, all that.
Yes, exactly.
You would only have one box.
Exactly. You only have one drug. Exactly. So remember, guys, when we talked about inhibition and induction of enzymes, you know, enzyme inhibitors, enzyme inducers. Okay, you have two drugs. One of them either inhibits the enzyme or induces the enzyme. In this case, the drug itself, okay, induces the enzyme that metabolizes it. Okay, I was trying to explain this, so let me do it here. Okay, so normally we have drug. One, it's metabolized by some enzyme into inactive form. Okay, and then we have, let's say, see how this is how enzymes are synthesized, right? This is a DNA, it's converted into an RNA, right? And then gives you the protein, which is an enzyme, right? So normally we have drug 2, which increases the synthesis of this enzyme. Okay, so you have what's called induction. Okay. Now with the autoinduction, the same drug here itself binds to the DNA RNA and causes induction, right? So it's like, affecting itself. The same drug itself binds to the DNA RNA and causes more of the enzyme. It causes autoinduction. Can you give me example of some drugs that causes autoinduction from the handout? Phenytoin, what else? Carbamazepine. I think there's others too. Gabapentin, is it among them? I'm not sure. I know for sure phenytoin and carbamazepine. So why is this important? Why autoinduction is an issue? Yeah, drug-drug interaction. Just like when you have drug interactions, it's like administering two drugs. Now the same drug affects itself. Okay. Now hopefully we have taken this into consideration and we give the exact dose of the drug, but still with the autoinduction, it's hard to control. With the non-linear kinetics of this drug, which we will talk about non-linear, it's hard to control how much drug I should give to make sure it stays within the therapeutic window. Okay, any questions about this before we start the applications? Yes, John.
It's not actually a question, but I want my answer that I just gave. There's another time that there's a square, and it's only one drug, and that would be inhibition. I don't want like everyone to think, oh, square one, and click that when it comes to the exam. It could be auto inhibition if that exists.
Auto inhibition?
Does it exist?
Oh, okay. Does auto inhibition exist? I don't think so, because when the enzyme is being metabolized, it's binding to the receptor. When the drug is being metabolized, it's binding to the receptor, to the enzyme. So it's actually, if it's auto-inhibit itself, it's under the process of being metabolized. Okay, so now, if the drug would bind, like, let's say, covalently and stay with the enzyme forever, then, that's another issue. So,
okay, so it's not going to be a test question.
Yeah,
we're not going to end up with circling depicting auto inhibition on your chart.
Sure. Okay, that's fine.
Well, I didn't want to tell everyone, hey, if you see this, it's this.
Of course. Yeah, but remember, it's not about the test. I wish I could change the way you think, but anyway.
For me to think about this.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other concerns about the rat? Yes, sir. Say it again. Is that a positive thing? Is that a good thing? What do you think? Okay, that's true. It's not a good thing because the drug stimulates the metabolism of itself, and then it would be hard to control how much drug should be there. Now, if we can do the math and find exactly how much drug we should give, then yeah, maybe we could ignore it. But then when this is not consistent, when this is varying from one person to another, then this is an issue because someone might have a different autoinduction, you might have a different autoinduction, then you end up having different concentrations, and then it's going to be out of the therapeutic window. Okay? Yes, Joe.
So, like for protons, like phenytoin is not a drug, right?
No.
Okay. So when it comes to drug, it could be a good thing, I guess.
Okay. So phenytoin. Are we finished? So if you have a prodrug and an auto-induce itself, okay, so two separate issues, okay? So phenytoin, first of all, is not a prodrug, we all know that. Phenytoin is a prodrug and it's converted to the phenytoin, okay? Now, phenytoin doesn't have autoinduction or anything. The issue is with a phenytoin. Now, does phenytoin fix the problem of having autoinduction? Does it fix it? No? Why did we have a prodrug phenytoin to begin with? Only to help us with the solubility, right? So the drug can dissolve and then we can take it, go through the circulation. But that once it's in the circulation, it's converted into phenytoin. But now we still have to deal with the autoinduction. Okay? All right. Any issues so far? We're having fun, some teams here. All right. Yes. Autoinduction. Okay, so instead of having two drugs with the drug-drug interaction, drug 2 stimulates synthesis of the enzyme. The same drug here itself stimulates the synthesis of the enzyme that metabolize the drug itself. So that's why it's called auto-induction. So it's an induction process, but done by the same drug. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the applications. The first one should be just a quick, fun application that compares between different kinds. I was actually so hesitant to put the application because I think if you look at the videos, well, let me see. How many of you have seen the YouTube videos about the? Okay, so you got the general idea about the different classes, different types of epilepsy, right? Okay, so let's skip exercise number 1. So, and we already know the mechanism of, mechanisms of epilepsy, either increase the excitation or decrease the inhibition, which leads to more stimulation. So, okay, so let's start by the nerve signal. Exercise number 2. Do you need a break? Yes? No? Well, let's take 7 minutes break and be back, okay? It's just to refresh. And then we'll start with the how the signal propagates and all these fun things. Okay, we'll come back. So, okay, so the goal for this exercise is to study action potential, how it is, propagating from one to another, what's depolarization, what's hyperpolarization, all these steps, including this figure here. Okay, all these steps involved, and then also how, this. So this is at the end of the neuron. Once the action potential reaches the end, there is certain steps that occurs from the end of this neuron to the next neuron, and then the signal keeps going, further. Okay, so we're going to study the action potential by itself, how the action potential moves, at the axon, and then once it reaches to the end, how is it transferred from one neuron to another. Once you study that, hopefully I have some volunteers to explain that, and then we'll make exercise number 3. We'll talk about, mechanisms of inhibition and excitation, how drugs are designed to, reduce the excitation of these neurons. Okay, so let's say maybe 10 minutes. So at 10:20, we'll see if you guys are finished. But please be prepared to come here and explain your answers. Okay, Adishola, this is going to be your job. Okay, so be prepared to come here. I'm gonna call random teams and then gonna explain to your team how to do it. Say it again. You want to answer that question? Okay, that's good. Awesome. Did you? They're looking at you like you have not consulted with them. So sure. Okay. In fact, guys, just so you know, I'm gonna have at least 3 teams explain this just to make sure that you have a different view, different ways of explaining things. Okay. This way, I already have 1 volunteer team, which is nice. Now, I'm gonna need at least 2 or maybe another 3. This way, everyone can look at the problem from different angle and learn from each other. Okay, 10:20. Guys, in the notes, you have seen the term bioequivalence. What is bioequivalence? Bioequivalence. You want to explain it? No? Yes? Okay, and I think about it, George. What's bioequivalence, guys? Huh? Okay, that's a different term. I know what you're thinking, but it's a different term.
Does the same thing in the body as another.
Okay, it is true, but it has to do with does the same thing. It's not like if you have two drugs that do the same pharmacological, have the same pharmacological effects, does that mean they are bioequivalent? Right?
So you have two drugs such that when you have different dosage of the drugs and they give the same therapeutic effect.
Okay, so if two drugs give the same therapeutic effects, they're called. So one drug can be interchanged with another, they give the same therapeutic effect, then we call them bioequivalent. Well, what if you have two drugs, they give the same efficacy, 100%, okay? With this, can we still call them bioequivalent? So guys, bioequivalent is actually used whenever we have same drug, but it's manufactured from different companies, you know, generic brands, okay? So bioequivalence actually has to do with the bioavailability. That's it. If two drugs have the same bioavailability, then they are defined, they're called bioequivalent. Okay?
So same bioavailability
Of the same drug, exactly.
but the delivery and the contents of the pill don't have to be the same. As long as it's always the same dosage.
Okay, so actually, we're talking about the same drug, the same dosage form, and if they have the same bioavailability, which is the area under the curve, then we call them bioequivalent. And it's only used when we talk about pharmaceutical preparations. And it's only used when we talk about different manufacturers. Sometimes drugs that has a narrow therapeutic index, it's very difficult to get the same bioavailability using drug X from company and the same drug from, drug from company X and the same drug from company Y, because minor changes in the way the drug was manufactured will give you different bioavailability. Okay, so you will see that a lot. You will see this later, but because it's in the notes, I want to explain it. So you will learn about bioequivalence later on in later sessions. Okay? Yes. Yes, so that's an example, maybe, let's say amoxicillin synthesized by Mylan and another amoxicillin synthesized by Teva, okay? So they both have the same bioavailability, the area under the curve. So then we call them bioequivalent, okay? So it's actually a way to measure a generic drug and say, oh, this drug is bioequivalent to this drug because they both give you the same bioavailability, okay? It's a way to evaluate, different dosage forms. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just thought I would explain this before I forget. Okay. I know it's a lot, so do you need more time? No? You want to discuss? Well, if you need more time, just let me know. You need more time, raise your hand. No? Okay, so you guys are ready, right? Question, okay. Okay, so let's start with volunteers. And I'm going to have at least 3 or 4 teams explain to all of us what's going on. So hopefully, like if you miss something from one team, you get it from the other one. Okay. So starting with volunteers, you guys are ready? All right, come on in.
All right. The first thing you have to understand is the presynaptic neuron has to release the neurotransmitters first. So the calcium has to come in and causes the vesicles to leave that neuron. And then neurotransmitter, they go into the postsynaptic nerves receptors, which causes the action potential. So usually the resting potential is going to be like around -70. And then once the action potential hits, it depolarizes. So the Na will go in right here. So NA will be in here, so it's more positive. More positive than outside. And then repolarization happens when the K efflux, which is when it starts leaving the cell. So it goes back to the negative down here, negative over here, to like the -70 again. And if it goes under to the refractory period, which is hyperpolarization, it is actually under the resting potential, so it's more negative, and then it'll eventually go back up to the resting potential.
So can you also add, you guys want to talk about the resting potential? Because as you've noticed, there are 2 stages, right? There is the signal at the synaptic cleft between one neuron to another, but then once that is passed, then the other signal is how the other mechanism is how the signal is moving through the axon, okay? So how, the signal is actually moving from, one end to the other end of the neuron. You want to guys explain that?
So the resting potential, first of all, we need to know that around the axon, we have membrane channels. So we have channels that, voltage gated channels that would let sodium come in, and then channels that will let potassium go out. But there are also other channels that their function is, they are called leak channels. They're just to leak out or allow sodium to come in and then potassium to go out. They work irrespective of either the stimulus that comes from the neighboring neuron. So they're independent of those. So when a neuron is at rest, the leak channels rather, they allow sodium to come in and potassium to go out, such that they kind of keep the charge gradient of the neuron, because the outside of the cell is supposed to be more positive than the inside. It's not supposed to be more negative.
So they kind of keep that balance between the outside and the inside such that sodium comes in and then potassium goes out. So when you have a stimulus that comes from maybe a neighboring neuron or maybe somebody touching you or something, it causes, like John explained, calcium comes in, allows vesicles to release neurotransmitter, and then that causes sodium channel to open. And then once sodium channel opens, there is a massive influx of sodium into the cell, and that causes, because now you have more positive charge going into the cell, so it reduces the negativity of the inside of the cell, and then it causes polarization. And the opposite happens when potassium channel opens and then potassium rushes out, and then that causes depolarization because you're moving back to the negative side of it. But there's a point where once sodium channel opens and then sodium rushes in and then the cell gets polarized, there will be a point where, because sodium channel carries this protein that blocks the channel once the action potential fires. So that gives a process, an interlude that is called the refractory stage, such that it doesn't matter even if you have an extra sodium binding to that receptor, it will not respond because it's already been blocked. And that is the advantage that some drugs take to extend that refractory period, so that to reduce the firing of the action potential.
You said repolarization was you flipped it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You just told me I flipped it. In my brain is just pardon me.
You guys have something else to add? No? Okay, well, thank you so much. Good job, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. More volunteers. Volunteers. Team number 4. Yay, come on in. Applause. Thank you so much, guys. So by the end of the month, I will have no money left in my account.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, we have the neuron, like when the nerves, like the electrical impulse coming through the neuron, we have the positive charge on the top, while the negative charge on the inside the membrane. Like example, when looking at the neuron itself, you know that it's kind of polar outside, while inside is hydrophilic. Yeah, negative charge. So as when there's a change in the electrical impulse, like coming in, the positive charge on the outside, allowing the leak pulses on the surface of the neuron, the membrane, allow the sodium ion to flow inside. And when the sodium ion flow inside, at this particular stage, it was at the resting position where the position of positive charge and negative charge is equal. It's in equilibrium. So when the sodium ion flow inside the neuron, it causing the neuron to adjust the positive charge. So more positive charge coming in and negative charge is neutralized. So it causing the neuron to become depolarized. So as the action continues, at a certain point in the at a certain point, we have a difference in action potential, which causes the essence of positive charge in the inside the membrane to go to a level at which it triggers what they call it reach at a threshold, which triggers the more sodium ion to come inside, causing the membrane more depolarized.
So
Yeah,
this is this part.
yeah. This is the part. Then, as increase in the inflow of the sodium ion, it causing the membrane to prepare the action potential at a level which it reaches what they call is it a peak. So the membrane adjusts itself, which automatically trigger the potassium ion to flow out of the membrane, causing the state to be repolarized again. And the process continues at a level that more potassium ion is outside the membrane, causing the inside to become more negative. And when it became more negative, we have what they call hypopolarization, and the membrane will adjust itself to get in equilibrium, which result as a resting potential again, and the process continue. It drives the electrical impulses towards the pre-synaptic neurons.
Okay, excellent. How about the how the message passes from at the end of the neuron to another neuron?
Okay, since since this incidents, we have electrical impulses coming towards the presynaptic. We call it presynaptic node. Where there's a calcium ions. Like example, when we have like acetylcholine, which usually comes at this particular point, the presynaptic listen. It triggers acetylcholine, it triggers the calcium ions to bind.
I just want to say, in this case, it's not acetylcholine. It's actually excitatory or inhibitory amino acids. Okay, just for the correction. Thank you.
Okay, so it triggers the calcium ion, which acts as a what I call inhibitory to hinder to open the gap for more ions to come inside. Okay. So I think at this point, you have something to add?
You were going right. That's what I wrote down.
Okay, yeah, they can continue. If you have something to add. So we have the potassium ion increase the induce calcium. The calcium ion increase the number of the what they call ion channels, allowing the more positive ion to enter into the synaptic vesicle here and allow the charges to flow across the gap. And here we have something like a GABA receptors that acts as a receptor that bind with the impulses. Yeah.
You guys have something else to add? You have something? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your time. Okay. I need 2 more teams. Yep, 2 more. Volunteers. Just so you know, I'm not being biased, okay? Okay, team number 11. Where's team number 11? All right, come on in. It's not my fault. Is this?
Okay, so we're going to talk about the propagation of action potential. And basically, it has to do with moving of impulses between two neurons. So we have the presynaptic neuron, and we also have the postsynaptic as well. So what happens, we have like transmission to the presynaptic. And of course, that already had the action potential from another neuron initially. So that gave it the action potential. And when this gets to that presynaptic neuron, so it has that option. It has kind of like a transient, we call it like a transient depolarization, meaning we have some impulses already that came in. So what this could do is that this could go and activate like the calcium channel, which is situated on in the presynaptic. So when this activates that, we now have because the calcium ion, that's a positive charge on it. So that now goes down to the presynaptic, and that goes and tries to like depolarize it. The presynaptic already had the resting membrane potential, which is usually in the negative side if we're comparing the, the neuron compared to the outside. Usually that could range maybe about negative 50 to I think 80, I think. So when this comes in the calcium, that goes ahead and tries to like depolarize it, meaning it tries to reduce the negativity on it. So when that happens, we now have a situation where the action potential is further encouraged to move, to propagate, because the goal is to reduce the negativity as much as possible. So that causes a depolarization. We have a situation where the vesicles will now move with the transmitters in it. So it goes to the synaptic cleft, then it goes, it actually lets the neurotransmitter, like he explained, the protein contained in it, that goes to the receptors there on the postsynaptic, and that binds to it. So it just depends on what situation we're looking at the postsynaptic. We could have the action potential still propagated, or if it's a situation where we're trying to inhibit it, that might not necessarily create a transmission, because we also have receptors again situated on the postsynaptic, and that could be either if we're trying to inhibit that, that could be like a chlorine, for instance. We could have like a channel like for GABA, for instance, that could actually make it go back again to the resting potential and make it go hyper. So that way it stops the action potential from going forward. Or we could have a situation whereby if we have the positive channel open again, that now causes the action potential to continue with the transmission.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. One more. Team number 5. 5, come on in. Applause.
Yeah. Okay. The top one's my drawing, and I should have autographed it. You wanted me here. So there's like a neuron, and the adjacent. Okay. Well, basically, oh, actually, yeah, if I put that there, you don't get to see my drawing, but. So,
It's coming back. It's coming back.
it is. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. The basically where there's all the pluses in the red in front of the sodium influx, it's polarized. And as the action potential starts, the sodium flows in, and the adjacent channels where the signal is going respond to the influx of sodium and open also and cause a wave of that depolarization. Behind the sodium channels opening, the potassium channels open and repolarize the membrane into a refractory state so that the signal doesn't propagate the other way. And then behind that also the sodium, potassium, ATPase things repolarize the membrane the other way where there's, I mean, the same ion way where it's still positive, except then the potassium gets pumped back in and the sodium gets pumped back out so that it can respond to another signal. Is that good enough?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. That's my note, actually. John, that's my note. Okay, so let's look at the this graph first. Make sure we understand everything in it. Okay, starting here at the resting state. Okay, so at the resting state, we have negative charges inside, positive charges outside, because there is more sodium outside, okay? So it's the difference between the positive charge outside and inside that makes the outside more positive. So you have more sodium outside. This is the resting state. So the first step is when this channel is triggered, and there are two ways of triggering this channel. Can you name these two ways? Remember when we talked about an ion channel, and there is voltage gated ion channels and there is ligand gated ion channels? This ion channel, the sodium, can actually be triggered in two ways. What are they? First, by the difference in the voltage. So the channel, when it feels that there's a difference in the voltage, because it's actually the signal is going closer, when it gets to that channel, it detects the difference and it knows that it's time to let the sodium in. That's one way. The other way is the ligand-gated ion channels. How are these activated? By neurotransmitters. At what stage? Is it at the axon or is it between the terminal? At the synapse, okay? So here, this is the stage where, you know, somewhere here, where the ion channels get activated, okay? So in either cases, the sodium channel gets activated and then sodium gets in. We go to step number 2. When the sodium gets in, I'm sorry, step number 2, yeah, depolarization here. When we get to step number 2, the sodium gets in. So notice that there is going to be a difference in the charge. And instead of having positive outside, negative inside, you're going to have this stage where the sodium is inside. So positive outside is now inside. So this is depolarization, right? We flipped the positive negative charge. We have depolarization. You have a question? Okay, we'll get to that when we talk about the second part. Okay, when we talk about the calcium influx and all that. So depolarization, okay, and then the next stage is repolarization. Now repolarization means that we're going back to here. So this is resting potential. This is the minimum amount required for the activation of the channel to occur. Once it happens, we have depolarization. Notice that we are moving from the negative inside to positive inside. This is the 0. This is positive. So we have depolarization. And then the next stage is when the potassium gets inside. Okay, and this causes depolarization. I'm sorry, repolarization. So we go back to the negative. Now, if the potassium keeps getting inside, at some point we have hyper polarization. Okay. I'm sorry, I meant not the potassium. I'm sorry, the potassium gets outside and the sodium gets inside. So then because the potassium gets outside more than it's supposed to, then you get to that stage of hyperpolarization, which is this pump here, okay? And then we go back to the resting potential where the sodium now is being kicked outside and potassium inside, and we go back to the normal stage, okay? So this pump, because it's below the resting potential, it's called hyperpolarization, okay? So now the difference between inside and outside is more than the minus 70 or minus 90, okay? Just want to make sure I did not mess up on the sodium potassium thing. Okay, so to briefly summarize what happens, sodium gets inside, and then this causes depolarization. Potassium gets outside, and then causes repolarization, okay? Now, too much potassium gets outside, causes hyperpolarization. And then the cell starts arranging things together, by pushing. There is another pump that actually works on both sodium and potassium together. So it actually kicks the sodium out and the potassium in and go back to the resting potential. Okay, John.
Whether or not an action potential actually fires after the close, some of the neurosignals like inhibitory and all that, you end up with all these chemicals, and then you have these channels. Some of them are ligand, and some of them are voltage gated. Are the voltage gated only regulated by voltage and all, whether or not, and so basically the decision is whether or not to have an action potential is formed by the number of ligand gated.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, this is actually a very good question. So the question is, these ion channels, are they only regulated by the difference in the voltage or by ligands? at this stage, at the axons, they're only regulated by the difference of the action potential. That's how the signal is moving through the axon, okay? So these ion channels are voltage-gated ion channels. When they feel, when the ion channel feels that the ion channel next to it is starting making the difference and there's a difference in the action potential, if that difference is enough to trigger this ion, if the difference reaches this level, then the ion channel gets activated and start working, okay? Later on, at the synaptic cleft is when these ligands and the neurotransmitters work. Got it, everyone? Questions about this part? Melody. Excellent. So what is the refractory period? The refractory period is the time it takes before the channel and everything goes back to resting state, okay? So once we get to that stage, hyperpolarization, after that, it takes some time for the neuron to go back to normal. So you have to kick the sodium outside and bring the potassium inside. And this is what the refractory period right here, okay? Step number 5. Okay, make sense, guys? Another way to look at it is at this chart here. So this is a neuron at the axon. This is what's happening. We have depolarization, and after that, the signal is moving from one channel to the next through the voltage-gated ion channels. And when these channels here are at the stage of depolarization, these here are at the stage of repolarization. So can these be activated? No. So that's what guarantees that the signal is moving in one direction. Okay, guys? So this is the reason why the signal is moving in this direction, okay? Because this cannot be activated. So once it gets to the resting state, now another signal can passes. Another way to look at it is here again. So sodium gets in, potassium gets out, sodium gets in, potassium gets out, and then it takes some time for the refractory period to get things back to normal. Okay, so now once the signal reach here, that's the signal, it reaches here. The first step it does is it affects the calcium channel. And is this a voltage-gated channel or a ligand-gated channel? What do you think? How is this channel activated? By the difference in the potential. So it's actually voltage-gated channel. So it actually affects this channel. Calcium gets in. Once the calcium gets in, it allows these vessels to, it triggers these vessels through some other signal transduction processes. The induced fit, the conformational change of the ion channel and all these receptors causes these vessels to get to the synaptic cleft and releases these neurons. Now, these neurons, are they inhibitory or excitatory? That's right. It depends on the neuron. Some neurons are inhibitory, others are excitatory. Okay? So if you look here, you would see that some neurons are inhibitory, others are excitatory. And when you have an inhibitory neuron, okay, guess what is the neurotransmitters that are released in this case? GABA. So the amino acid GABA. When you have an excitatory neuron, guess what's the amino acid that will be released? The glutamate, and there's other examples too. Okay, so back to here. So now you have the neurons released, and depending on whether it's an excitatory or inhibitory, then it's going to affect the release of the action. It's going to affect, either let the sodium inside. What happens when the sodium get inside? Depolarization. Or if it's a GABA, it's going to make chloride inside. So you have hyperpolarization. Okay. Now, if you have, so overall, each neuron is controlled by different excitatory inhibitory. So at the end, depending on the outcome of this inhibitory excitation and excitatory, the neuron will decide, to either stop, do nothing, or to produce the signal, and through sodium gets in, and again, the step processes move through the axon. Make sense, guys? Okay. Did this answer your question, Kevin? Did this answer your question? Okay. Yes. 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 What starts the first sodium channel to open? Okay. So you're talking about the transmission of, for example, a pain. Okay. So I'm not 100% sure. My guess would be that it's through different mechanism of the neuron. I guess the pain receptors. The pain receptors somehow leads to stimulation of the signal, but it has to do with the influx of the calcium, stimulation of some excitatory neurons, and then that's what passes to the CNS and give the message that there is a pain or something. Okay. Or it could be not necessarily pain, but something else. So eventually it has to do with this here. So you could, in this graph here, we are looking at the action potential stimulating this process. It could be something else. It could be like another, neurotransmitter that would actually stimulate the release of, calcium inside and stimulate this process. Okay. Yes. Mechanical receptor. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. Pressure. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Thank you. So yes. So the first. So this goes in line with the question Kevin asked, which is the first first step ever is through different kinds of receptors, mechanical, chemical, bioreceptors, depending on the difference, depending on the mechanism of these receptors, they trigger the sodium channel to start producing the signal. Questions? Yes, sir. Of course. Okay, it's hard to see for people on this angle, so you draw here because people can see. Everyone can see the screen.
So my question is, if this is neuron A that fired, and this is neuron B and this is neuron C, such that neuron B is excitatory and neuron C is inhibitory. Okay, if neuron A fired such that the end of this neuron released a neurotransmitter that is excitatory, that will bind, for example, let's say it released a glutamate, and this is excitatory. Glutamate will bind with this. But what happens to this neuron? Since it's connecting, getting a source from this neuron as well, would this be able to bind to, because it's inhibitory to, let's say, take GABA, for example. How would this fire or not?
Okay, so it depends on the total excitation and inhibition for this neuron. So for each neuron, it's been fed by excitatory and inhibitory. So depending on what's the total, summation of both excitation and inhibition, then this neuron will decide to pass the message or not. That's why when you have defect, in these ion channels, then there is a defect in the action potential. So people are more likely to get these neurons excited and get into the convulsion.
Basically, the neuron can either take both glutamate and GABA.
Yes. So the neuron itself has receptors from both. Okay. And actually, I'm not a pathophysiologist, but there are certain regions in the brain where it's actually protected by inhibitory neurons. So the message can only go one way. So, and the message should not cross these barriers in the brain from one side to the other. Okay. So there is more control to this message. My concern, what I want you to take from this is how drugs can influence, the pass of the message, which brings us to the next stage. But before I do, I want to make sure you guys have questions about this so far. Okay, just to get an idea, can you raise your hand if you got this 100%? Okay, great. So if you don't, it's okay. After 12 today, we can, visit things that are still, questionable. Okay, so this brings us to the next exercise here. Okay, which is the next practice exercise. So as you can see, we have, for example, that's an inhibitory neuron, right? It releases GABA. So drugs that act on the GABA release, they can increase the release of GABA. They can actually inhibit the reuptake of GABA. Remember in some previous exercise, we talked about how the life cycle of the neuron, it's being released, and then it binds to the receptor, and then it's go back, it's being uptake and taken back inside the neuron. So if you block the uptake of this GABA, guess what happens? More of the GABA neurotransmitter stays in the synaptic cleft, and it's gonna bind more and more and goes more inhibition. Also, another way is if this neurotransmitter is actually being metabolized by an enzyme. We talked about acetylcholine, right? What's the enzyme that metabolizes acetylcholine? Acetylcholine esterase, right? If this GABA is metabolized by some enzyme, so can you think of a way to, have more effect of the GABA? Block that enzyme, inhibit the enzyme that metabolizes the GABA, and you will see drugs like that. So we have GABA transaminase enzyme. We have drugs that inhibits the transaminase, which actually metabolizes the GABA, okay? On the other hand, the excitatory channels, so the excitatory channels would actually cause the influx of the sodium, okay? So you could actually encourage that. I'm looking at some examples here. Okay, sodium channel blockers. So these are actually blockers. So they are gonna be inhibitory. Well, all the drugs are gonna be inhibitory here. So we're looking at drugs that would actually kind of block the sodium channel, okay? So this way the sodium is not gonna fire. I mean, it's not gonna be, working, and it's not gonna let the sodium in. It's not gonna depolarize, okay?
I don't understand the alpha 2.
Here, okay. Alpha 2 agonist on calcium channel, gabapentin. Calcium channels, alpha 2 delta agonist. Okay, so the ion channel itself is a protein. Part of this protein has alpha beta sheets. Remember the structure of the protein? So these drugs, they stimulate the calcium channel to, let's see, calcium channel voltage gated, glutamate. So, So this is an excitatory neuron. Okay, I see what's happening here. Okay, so guys, notice that this one here is inhibitory, okay? This one here is excitatory, okay? So if you stimulate more of the calcium here, what happens? If the calcium channel, remember in the process of the, at the end, at the synaptic cleft, when the calcium channel gets in and then it stimulates the release of some neurotransmitters, right? These could be inhibitory or excitatory. In both cases, in order for these amino acids or neurotransmitters to be excreted, we'll need the calcium channel to get the process to stimulate the vessels to be released. Okay, so in both cases, we have calcium channel getting inside, stimulate the release of these neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters could be GABA, which is inhibitory, or it could be glutamate, as in the case of excitatory. So in the alpha-2 subunit agonist, they will enhance the release of the calcium such that these vessels can bind and release the glutamate. So, well, in this case, it would be excitatory, yes. Right, so why does it say, yeah, I see your point. Let me double check on that, okay? Okay, so I'm trying to understand why the agonist on this channel, because in theory it should block. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I see your point. So, yep, that's a good point, John. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
I'm thinking of the subunit like a little ball where it's plugging down the channel so that the calcium doesn't go through. That's what I'm thinking. So it's not an agonist for the calcium channel itself, but the subunit that closes that channel so that the neurotransmitters doesn't go like the calcium doesn't go. That makes sense. It's like this is like a subunit. I'm thinking of that one. So if you closes that one, to get an agonist where it's closing, so nothing goes through to that, so it's inhibitory.
So it inhibits the calcium channel itself.
Because it's a subunit agonist, but
Okay, guys. So how do you address the insolubility issue with the phenytoin? So we know the pH is 7.4, which is below the pKa, and it's a weak acid, so it's going to be unionized. How do we solve the problem? Make it a product. That's one of the options, right? So one option is making a prodrug, which is the phosphenytoin, and I want to show you the structure of that. Okay, so the phos is from phosphate. So what happens is we add, I'm sorry. Okay. So phos is from phosphate. So we add a phosphate group, which is ionized. Okay. So now the drug is stronger acid. Okay. So it can easily be ionized. Okay. And then once it's absorbed in the circulation, what happens to the phosphate group? It hydrolyzes using the enzyme phosphatase. Okay, so just like with the esterase, phosphatase. Okay, so the enzyme breaks this back to phenytoin. So that's one way of solving the problem. Okay, what's the other ways of solving the problem? Make a base solution. Excellent. So there are solutions that we could use buffer, okay, and maintain the pH of that IV or intramuscular injection, around 11 pH, okay? And then the drug will be soluble as you administer the drug into the IV or the muscle, okay? Now, what happens when the drug is administered? I mean, it's gonna be facing a different pH, right? So in theory, the drug should dissolve again. I mean, not dissolve again. So it's going to be back to the pH of 7.4. So that's why you administer the drug very slowly. Okay. So you give the drug in a smaller amount, and then as soon as it gets into the blood, it dissolves, and then it gives the effect, and then now it's go back to the different pH, and then it's not soluble anymore, and you keep administering the drug slowly to gives the effect. That is the IV administration. Okay. Yes. Oh, the precipitate form does not go to the receptor. So the part that is not soluble will not get to the receptor, only the part that is soluble, okay? Now remember that even though you have a different pH, there is still percentage of the drug that is still ionized because you have a different pH pKa. So let's say 10% is unionized. Actually, 10% is ionized, 90% unionized. So our goal is to maintain this 10% or increase it as much as we can just to give the effect. Okay. Yes.
So once it hits blood and it's non-ionized,
yes.
can it not cross the blood-brain barrier, or is it just inactive?
Okay, that's a good point. So the drug has to cross the blood-brain barrier, but this is not an issue because it's actually lipophilic. Our goal is to make it soluble. Remember, there is a range. No. In order to cross the blood-brain barrier, it has to be unionized. Okay. Now it's a balance between the both, but the first issue is make it to dissolve, and then we could actually, part of it will be ionized, part of it will be unionized. Now the majority of drug is unionized, and that form is the one that's going to pass to the blood-brain barrier. Now there is one important point, which is that if you administer a small amount of the drug, right, then the solubility of the drug is actually very low, okay? So part of the drug will still reach to the CNS. Now the trick is you will administer the drug slowly, because if you administer a higher amount of the drug, then more of the drug will accumulate and will be insoluble, Trying to find a better way to explain this.
I mean, if it's not soluble, it's a small particle just going to be pushed along the blood, correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
at that point, could it cross the blood-brain barrier, or does it just get excreted and never?
right. So actually, because the drug is mainly unionized, we're not worried about crossing the blood-brain barrier. We're worried about bringing the drug within this log P just to dissolve, and then it's it's gonna cross the blood-brain barrier anyway. I guess the issue I'm trying to explain is you're having the drug in the buffer, which is 11 pH, but then once it's in the blood, it's 7.4, and you cannot change the pH of the blood, right? So you are just buying time for the drug to dissolve until you get the effect, and then the drug is so the pH is going to 7.4 again. So again, the drug is insoluble.
But are you really trying to dissolve it, or is it really just you want a low enough quantity in the blood that you're not going to cause the equivalent of embolism?
Well, actually both, because your goal is to provide something like embolism, and at the same time to avoid the drug being insoluble. So by giving small amount of the drug, you actually let the drug distribute before it accumulates. See, let's say that the blood can handle this much of the drug, but if you give it faster, then it's going to become insoluble quickly. But when you give it small, at intermittent doses, like small dosages, then the drug can distribute. Guys, we will visit this again on Friday because I'm not happy with the way you explained it. So let's before I break. So we have this exercise here, number 5, which we'll visit again on Friday, and we'll talk about advantages and disadvantages of the carbamazepine. I'm comparing, exercise number 5 and 6. Okay. For now, let's break. If you wanna go for lunch, whatever, I'm gonna stay here. This is my office hours anyway, and we'll discuss the issues you had with today's lecture. Okay. So have a good afternoon. You are welcome to stay or ask me here or. Guys, let's break. Let's take 10 minutes break, and then if you're interested, you can stay here, and then we'll answer questions for everyone, and instead of individual basis. Make sense? So 10 minutes break. Please remember to turn on your sign-in sheet.